I'm Mrs. Miller, your teacher at ELA Academy. Welcome to Part 3 of Essay Basics. In Part 1, we talked about the different modes of writing. In Part 2, we looked at examples of how you might structure your essays. Today, we'll talk about how to generate ideas. You'll find this lesson helpful primarily for expository and persuasive writing, but you can use the same general concept to prepare ahead of time for other types of essays. In an ideal world, you would only have to write about things you wanted to write about, when you feel inspired, and you'd have all the time you wanted to work on it. In the real world, though, you are often under a strict time limit and have to come up with an idea on the spot, and then figure out how you're going to stretch that idea into a whole essay. I don't know about you, but under those conditions, my brain usually feels like this: a dry desert with nothing helpful in sight. Wouldn't it be nicer if you could sit down to a timed essay with this in your head? It may still feel like a desert, hot and uncomfortable under the beating sun of the stopwatch and the grade, but at least you would have an oasis to keep you alive and in the game. You would have some resources in mind that you've already built up and kept at the ready for your time of need. You can find all sorts of resources to help you generate ideas, but I'm a particular fan of Gretchen Burnaby. Teachers, you will find these two books helpful for all stages of the writing process, including idea generation. These are lessons that actually work and help students write essays that don't sound lifeless and standardized. And they're helpful for all levels, including ESL, special education, and AP pre-AP. Writers can benefit directly from these books as well. So how do you create an essay oasis? If you remember from Essay Basics Part 1, we talked about how the narrative mode can work well within expository and persuasive essays. So begin by collecting a variety of personal anecdotes, brief stories from your own life experience about yourself and others. Also begin collecting a list of historical and current events. Make sure you actually know something about them, though. I can't tell you how many times I watched students decide that Martin Luther King Jr. would be a perfect illustration for their point. And they were probably right. But all they really remembered about him was that he gave a speech about having a dream and was assassinated. They quickly ran out of details and had a very thin paper indeed. Also keep in mind that the most well-known historical events are also the most written about. If you want your paper to stand out because you used a unique example, start paying attention in history class to the lesser-known events and do some extra reading on things that interest you. For example, when I took a college class about World War II, the things that interested me the most were the military equipment, like radios and tanks and bomber planes, and how they affected the course of the war. That's something I would add to my essay oasis. Other things you can collect: your positions on controversial issues, like how high taxes should be, or whether people should be allowed to carry guns, or what kind of military involvement the United States should have in the Middle East. Interesting objects like Google glasses, driverless cars, longbows, standardized shoe sizes, essential oils, or anything you find interesting that might have an impact on people's lives. And of course, interesting places and interesting people. You can come up with other ideas and have your own way of recording these thoughts for later use, but let's look at one example of what you might do. Your teacher might already have something like this to help you generate ideas. He or she might call it an idea bank, an idea pool, or a quick list, but they all serve to help you think of a wide variety of ideas, things that might not just pop into your head on the day of a timed essay. You can find this handout on my website at elaacademy.us. I'll include a link in the description of this video. Now, this handout isn't intended to give you every idea you could possibly write about. That would just be too long. But it should cover a wide variety of your experiences and perhaps give you ideas for other things you could add to the list. What I suggest is jotting down 1 or 2 ideas for every single item. Just in the margin is fine. That doesn't mean you have to develop every idea, just that it's there in case you want to develop it later. Here is how I would start. Number 1, things that didn't exist when my parents were kids that I can't live without. I could certainly put smartphones, though if you and your parents are young enough, that might not work for you. I'd also list the calendar on my cell phone. It's always with me, and I can have it give me an audible alert that I have some kind of appointment or other reminder coming up. Number 2, things that did exist when my parents were kids that I can't live without. Cars would be an obvious choice. If I wanted to be a little more original, I might list grocery stores. I can't imagine having to raise and farm my own food and still have time to do other things I want to do, like making videos for ELA Academy. Number 3, things that other people can't seem to live without that I think are kind of silly. You can substitute other adjectives like harmful or annoying. I might list high heels here. I know they're very fashionable and can make your calves look awesome, but any doctor will tell you they're incredibly bad for your feet. Let me skip down to number 7, fictional characters that really came to life in my mind. I'll confess to being sort of stereotypical. Yes, I fell in love with Mr. Darcy in the novel Pride and Prejudice. Sorry, he just seemed so real to me the first time I read the book, and I grew fond of him right alongside of Elizabeth Bennet. So keep going down the list and filling in something next to each item. Now let's look at how to develop these ideas a little bit. You don't want to write whole essays on every single idea you have, but likewise, you don't just want a list of one-word ideas. Like I said earlier about Martin Luther King Jr., you might list an idea and realize too late that you don't know enough about it to use in an essay. So let's look at the example. Somewhere along the way, I decided that I could write about my experience in marching band at the University of North Texas. Now I'll just jot down a few ideas that go along with that experience. I could write about a lot of things related to that band, but the experience that stands out in my memory was our performance at the first football game of the season. If I used this as an anecdote, I might talk about how excited the audience was, how they were probably excited before we even showed up because we had a reputation as an awesome band, how loud the music was, echoing off the stands, how we hit all our marks and played better than we had in practice because we were so excited and proud to show off, how it felt to stand at attention at the end of our show while the wild cheering washed over us and the feeling of pride and adrenaline that we had. Now, this is certainly not a complete list of details. If I were to actually write an essay with this anecdote, I might include a lot more things, like a little flashback to describe how I'd gotten into the band, what practice was like, what our band director was like, how being in the saxophone section was such a different experience from playing clarinet, as I'd always done before. There were a lot more guys, and it was a lot more relaxed and goofy. I'd describe how nervous I was, lining up with everyone just outside the tunnel in our uniforms, section leaders shushing people and reminding them that even whispers would echo in the tunnel, and so on. But at least this short list of details proves to me, and perhaps my teacher, that I know enough about this idea to write about it. The last column is where you write something called a truism. A truism is a self-evident, obvious truth. This is a life lesson that applies to whatever you might be writing about. In your essay, it will serve as your thesis statement in the first paragraph. It's the main idea of the essay. If you're responding to a prompt on a standardized test or that your teacher gave you, it will be your answer to the prompt. So looking at my UNT marching band example, I was able to come up with 2 different truisms. Ideally, you'll write more than one because each idea might work for several different essay prompts. I wrote, "Being appreciated can make all of the hard work and sacrifice worthwhile." That might work for a prompt that says, "Write an essay about the value of hard work." In that case, I would shape the idea to emphasize how hard we worked and how good it felt when the audience went crazy for our performance. I also wrote, "Sometimes we can accomplish greater things as a team than as individuals." That would work for a prompt asking whether it's better to work with a group or by yourself, or asking about the value of teamwork. In that case, I might talk about how we started out as sort of an unruly group of soloists, with lots of people trying to show off and play louder than the rest of the band. We had to learn how to think more about how we melded our sounds with the rest of the group and watch the people around us so that we made perfect shapes on the field. I came up with these truisms because they were life lessons that I learned from that experience. I hope that this video has helped you understand how to generate ideas for your essays. Watch for the next video, which will help you with developing these ideas further with the help of text structures. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest. And check out the blog post for this video, which will include a wealth of helpful resources. This is ELA Academy.